The security camera footage went viral within hours. It showed everything: a sleek black Mercedes weaving through traffic at excessive speed, running a red light, and nearly striking an elderly man crossing the street with his service dog. But that wasn't the worst part. When the elderly veteran, 72-year-old Robert Hayes, a decorated Korean War hero, approached the vehicle to confront the reckless driver, what happened next shocked the entire community of Riverside County. Brandon Calloway, 23, stepped out of his Mercedes with a smirk that radiated entitlement. His designer sunglasses cost more than most people's monthly rent. His tailored suit screamed privilege. And his words? They dripped with contempt. "Get out of my way, old man," the footage captured him saying. "Do you have any idea who my father is?" Robert Hayes, who had served his country with distinction and spent 4 decades teaching at the local high school after his military service, calmly responded that reckless driving endangered lives. That's when Brandon Calloway made his fatal mistake. He shoved the elderly veteran hard. Robert stumbled backward, his service dog barking frantically. But Brandon wasn't finished. When Robert tried to steady himself, Brandon shoved him again, this time with enough force to send the 72-year-old crashing to the pavement. The sickening crack of bone on concrete echoed through the intersection. Multiple witnesses rushed to help. Someone called 911. Others recorded everything on their phones. Brandon Calloway stood there, adjusting his suit jacket, seemingly unconcerned about the bleeding, elderly man lying on the ground. "My father is Senator Marcus Calloway," he announced to the gathering crowd, as if that explained everything. "You people have no idea what kind of trouble you're asking for." Robert Hayes was rushed to Riverside General Hospital with a fractured hip, a severe concussion, and multiple contusions. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive. At his age, such injuries could have been fatal. The community's reaction was immediate and fierce. Robert Hayes wasn't just any elderly man. He was a pillar of Riverside County, a war hero who had earned a Silver Star for valor, a beloved teacher who had shaped 3 generations of students, and a volunteer who spent his retirement mentoring at-risk youth. His wife had passed away 2 years earlier, and his service dog, Max, was his constant companion. Within 24 hours, the intersection where the assault occurred was covered in flowers, cards, and American flags. Vigils were held. Local news stations ran the story continuously. Social media exploded with outrage. #Justice for Robert Hayes trended nationally. Senator Marcus Calloway's office issued a carefully worded statement expressing concern for all parties involved and asking for privacy during this difficult time. The statement was met with fury. People didn't want carefully worded press releases. They wanted accountability. Brandon Calloway was arrested and charged with aggravated assault of an elderly person, reckless endangerment, and leaving the scene of an incident. He posted bail within hours, a $100,000 bond that meant nothing to the Calloway family fortune. At his arraignment, Brandon showed up in another expensive suit, flanked by 3 attorneys from one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. He pleaded not guilty with the same arrogant smirk he'd worn in the viral video. The preliminary hearings were a circus. Brandon's lawyers filed motion after motion, seeking to suppress evidence, dismiss charges, and delay the trial. They argued that their client was being unfairly persecuted due to his father's political position. They claimed the viral video was edited and taken out of context. They suggested that Robert Hayes had provoked the confrontation. The community was outraged, but not surprised. Everyone knew how the system worked for people like Brandon Calloway. Money bought lawyers. Lawyers bought delays. Delays bought time for public attention to fade. And then, quietly, charges would be reduced, plea deals would be struck, and justice would be denied. But they hadn't counted on Judge Margaret Chen. Judge Chen, a 30-year veteran of the bench and a former Marine Corps JAG officer, was assigned to the case. She had a reputation for being fair but uncompromising. She had no patience for legal theatrics or attempts to manipulate the system. And she had seen enough privileged defendants walk free to know exactly what Brandon Calloway's lawyers were trying to do. She denied every delay tactic. She rejected every frivolous motion. And she set a trial date that gave Brandon's legal team just 6 weeks to prepare. "This court will not be manipulated," she stated firmly during one hearing. "Mr. Calloway will face justice like any other defendant. His father's position is irrelevant. His family's wealth is irrelevant. The only thing that matters in this courtroom is the law." As the trial date approached, tension in Riverside County reached a fever pitch. The courthouse received threats. Security was increased. Media trucks lined the streets. Everyone wanted to see if Brandon Calloway would finally face real consequences for his actions. Robert Hayes, still recovering from his injuries, told reporters that he just wanted justice. "I didn't serve my country and spend my life teaching young people about responsibility and respect just to watch someone get away with violence because of their last name," he said, leaning on his cane with Max sitting protectively at his feet. The trial began on a humid Monday morning in July. The courthouse was packed beyond capacity. Dozens of people stood outside, holding signs demanding justice. News helicopters circled overhead. The entire nation seemed to be watching. Brandon Calloway arrived in yet another expensive suit, surrounded by his legal team. He waved dismissively at protesters, that infuriating smirk still plastered across his face. He appeared utterly confident that his father's influence and his family's money would save him. Inside the courtroom, Judge Chen took her seat and surveyed the scene with her characteristic calm intensity. The jury had been selected, 12 ordinary citizens who had somehow managed to avoid extensive exposure to the viral video and the media frenzy. The prosecution's case was devastating. They presented the security camera footage, which showed everything in crystal-clear detail. They brought forward witnesses who testified about Brandon's reckless driving and his callous behavior after the assault. They presented medical evidence of Robert's injuries and expert testimony about the serious risks such trauma posed to someone his age. And then, Robert Hayes himself took the stand. The courtroom fell completely silent as the elderly veteran, still moving stiffly from his injuries, made his way to the witness stand with Max at his side. Judge Chen had granted a special accommodation allowing the service dog to accompany him, an unusual but compassionate decision. Robert's testimony was powerful in its simplicity. He didn't dramatize. He didn't embellish. He simply told the truth about what had happened that day, speaking with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced far worse dangers than an arrogant young man in an expensive suit. "I've been knocked down before," Robert said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I've been in combat. I've faced enemies who wanted to kill me. But I never thought I'd be assaulted on an American street by a young man who thinks his father's position makes him above the law." When Brandon's attorneys cross-examined him, trying to suggest he had somehow provoked the incident, Robert maintained his composure. "I approached his vehicle because his reckless driving nearly killed me and my dog," he explained. "I thought, perhaps foolishly, that a reasonable conversation might prevent someone else from being hurt. I was wrong about his reasonableness." The prosecution rested their case. The evidence was overwhelming. The video didn't lie. The witnesses were credible. Robert Hayes was beyond reproach. Now it was the defense's turn. Brandon's attorneys had clearly decided on a strategy: minimize, deflect, and attack. They brought in character witnesses who testified about Brandon's charitable contributions, all arranged by his father's staff. They presented a traffic expert who claimed the Mercedes's speed couldn't be accurately determined from the video. They suggested that Robert's injuries were pre-existing and exacerbated by age rather than caused by the assault. And then, they called Brandon Calloway himself to the stand. But a revelation unexpected was pressed to change everything in the tribunal. The atmosphere in the courtroom was suffocating as Brandon Calloway took the witness stand. Every seat was occupied. People lined the walls. The jury sat forward, watching intently. Outside, hundreds more watched on screens set up by local news stations. Judge Margaret Chen observed Brandon with the careful attention of someone who had seen countless defendants over 3 decades. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes, sharp and assessing, missed nothing. Brandon settled into the witness chair with an air of casual confidence that bordered on contempt. He adjusted his tie, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both nervousness and arrogance. His lead attorney, Martin Westbrook, a silver-haired veteran of defending wealthy clients, began the questioning. "Mr. Calloway, can you tell the court in your own words what happened on the afternoon of May 15th? Brandon leaned back slightly, that trademark smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "I was driving home from a business meeting. I'll admit, I was in a hurry. I may have been going a bit over the speed limit. The light was yellow, not red, as some have claimed, when I entered the intersection." Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. The video clearly showed a red light. "And what happened when Mr. Hayes approached your vehicle?" "This elderly man came at me, shouting and acting aggressively. He was clearly upset, but honestly, he seemed confused. I thought he might be suffering from dementia or something." Brandon's tone was dismissive, almost condescending. "I tried to calm him down, but he became more agitated." In the gallery, several of Robert's former students shook their heads in disgust. "And the physical contact? I barely touched him. He was getting in my personal space, so I used my hand to create some distance. It's not my fault he's old and unsteady. People that age probably shouldn't be walking around busy intersections without supervision." The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. Judge Chen struck her gavel once, sharply. "Order." Brandon seemed pleased with the reaction he'd provoked, his smirk widening slightly. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Sarah Martinez, a passionate advocate known for her relentless pursuit of justice, waited for her turn with barely contained fury. When Westbrook finally concluded his gentle questioning, Martinez stood with purpose. "Mr. Calloway, you testified that the light was yellow when you entered the intersection. Is that correct?" "Yes." "So the security camera footage showing a red light, that's wrong?" "Cameras can be misleading. Angles, timing. The timestamp on the footage is synchronized with the traffic signal system. There's no ambiguity. You ran a red light. Yes or no?" Brandon shifted in his seat. "I entered on yellow." "That's not what I asked. The footage shows red. Is the footage wrong, or are you lying under oath?" "Objection." Westbrook jumped to his feet. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Judge Chen said, but her eyes remained fixed on Brandon. "Rephrase, Ms. Martinez." "Mr. Calloway, are you saying that multiple camera angles, timestamp data, and witness testimony are all incorrect?" "I'm saying that's what I remember." Martinez let the obvious evasion hang in the air. "You testified that Mr. Hayes came at you and was acting aggressively. What specifically did he do that was aggressive?" "He was yelling, waving his arms." "What exactly did he yell?" Brandon hesitated. "I don't remember the exact words." "Really?" "Because multiple witnesses testified that he calmly stated you were driving recklessly. That doesn't sound aggressive, does it?" "It felt threatening to me." "A 72-year-old man with a service dog felt threatening to you, a 23-year-old in excellent physical condition?" "You weren't there. You don't know what it felt like." "Let's talk about what happened next. You said you barely touched him. The medical evidence shows Mr. Hayes suffered a fractured hip, severe concussion, and multiple contusions. How does barely touching someone cause those injuries?" "Like I said, he's old. Old people are fragile. It's tragic, but—" "So it's Mr. Hayes's fault that your assault caused serious injuries? Because he had the audacity to be elderly?" I didn't assault anyone. Brandon's voice rose, his composure cracking slightly. I defended myself from an aggressive old man who— Who what? Who dared to suggest you shouldn't drive recklessly? Who had the nerve to think laws applied to you? Objection. Westbrook was on his feet again. Withdrawn. Martinez paused, then played her trump card. Mr. Calloway, after Mr. Hayes fell and was lying injured on the ground, what did you do? I checked to see if he was okay. That's interesting. Because multiple witnesses testified that you stood there, adjusted your suit, and announced your father's name and position. Does that sound like checking on someone? Brandon's jaw tightened. People were already helping him. I didn't need to. You didn't need to help an elderly man you had just assaulted? You didn't need to call for medical assistance? You didn't need to show even basic human decency. I didn't assault him. No? Then what would you call shoving a 72-year-old man so hard he fractured his hip? It was an accident. He shouldn't have been in my face. So he deserved it? Is that your testimony? Brandon's face flushed red. That's not what I said. Then what are you saying, Mr. Calloway? Help this court understand. You ran a red light, nearly struck an elderly veteran, and when he politely confronted you about your dangerous behavior, you shoved him so hard he ended up in the hospital. And somehow, in your mind, you're the victim here. My father is Senator Marcus Calloway. Brandon suddenly blurted out, as if this explained everything. Do you have any idea what kind of pressure I'm under? Do you know what it's like to live under that kind of scrutiny? Everyone expects me to be perfect, and one mistake, one moment, and suddenly I'm being crucified. The courtroom went deathly silent. Judge Chen leaned forward slightly, her expression hardening. Mr. Calloway, are you suggesting that your father's position entitles you to special treatment? Brandon seemed to realize he'd made a mistake, but his arrogance wouldn't let him back down. I'm saying that this whole situation has been blown out of proportion because of who I am. If I were anyone else, this wouldn't even be a trial. You're absolutely right, Judge Chen said, her voice cold as ice. If you were anyone else, you would have shown remorse. You would have apologized. You would have taken responsibility for your actions. But instead, you stand before this court showing the same arrogance you displayed on that street corner, treating a decorated war veteran with contempt, and suggesting that your last name should shield you from consequences. Brandon's lawyers looked panicked. This was spiraling out of control. Judge Chen continued, In my 30 years on this bench, I have seen many defendants. Some show genuine remorse. Some claim innocence despite overwhelming evidence. But rarely, very rarely, do I see someone display such utter disregard for their victim, for this court, and for the concept of justice itself. Your Honor, Westbrook interjected desperately, my client is under tremendous stress. Mr. Westbrook, your client just told this court that he believes he's being unfairly persecuted because of his father's position. He just suggested that assaulting an elderly veteran is a mistake that should be overlooked. Do you really want to continue this line of defense? Before Westbrook could respond, Judge Chen addressed the entire courtroom. Mr. Hayes, would you please stand? Robert Hayes, who had been sitting in the front row with Max at his feet, slowly rose. Even with his injuries still evident in the way he moved, he stood with dignity. Mr. Hayes, Judge Chen said, you served your country with distinction. You earned a Silver Star. You spent 4 decades teaching young people about responsibility, respect, and citizenship. Can you tell this court what you hoped to accomplish when you approached Mr. Calloway's vehicle that day? Robert's voice was clear and steady. Your Honor, I simply hoped to prevent someone else from being hurt. I've spent my life trying to help young people become better than they thought they could be. I suppose old habits die hard. The contrast between Robert's quiet dignity and Brandon's arrogant entitlement could not have been more stark. Judge Chen nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. You may be seated." She turned back to Brandon, who was now looking decidedly uncomfortable. "Mr. Calloway, you have been given every advantage in life. Education, wealth, opportunity. And yet, when faced with a moment that required basic human decency, you chose violence and arrogance. When given the opportunity to show remorse, you chose to invoke your father's name as a shield." Brandon started to speak, but Judge Chen held up a hand. "I'm not finished. This court will not be swayed by political connections or family wealth. Justice is not for sale in my courtroom. And what you clearly fail to understand is that with privilege comes responsibility. Your father's position doesn't put you above the law, it should hold you to a higher standard." The courtroom was so quiet that people could hear their own heartbeats. Judge Chen looked past Brandon to the gallery. "Before I announce this court's decision regarding bail pending sentencing, I want to know if anyone else wishes to address the court. This is highly unusual, but this entire case has been exceptional in all the wrong ways." And then someone stood up in the back of the tribunal. The figure that rose from the back row of the gallery seemed to emerge from shadows. As he stepped into the aisle, a ripple of recognition swept through the courtroom. Murmurs grew louder. Heads turned. Cell phones were raised. Senator Marcus Calloway. He had been there the entire time, sitting inconspicuously in the back corner, wearing a simple dark suit instead of his usual power attire. No entourage. No security detail visible. Just a father watching his son's trial, hidden among the common citizens. Brandon's face went white. His eyes widened in shock and what looked like sudden fear. "Dad?" he whispered, though his voice carried in the silent courtroom. Marcus Calloway walked down the center aisle with slow, deliberate steps. His face was carved from stone, stern, weathered, carrying the weight of a decision that had clearly cost him everything. At 58, he had the bearing of a military man, though he'd actually built his career in law and politics. But today, he looked every one of his years. Judge Chen watched his approach with careful attention. "Senator Calloway? Your Honor." Marcus's voice was deep and controlled, though emotion lurked beneath the surface. "I apologize for the irregular nature of this request, but I ask the court's permission to address these proceedings." Westbrook shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly improper. Senator Calloway is not a witness, and—" "Sit down, Westbrook." Judge Chen's voice cut through the objection like a blade. "Senator, approach the bench." Marcus walked forward, stopping at the barrier between the gallery and the well of the court. He didn't look at his son, though Brandon stared at him with a mixture of hope and terror. "Senator Calloway," Judge Chen said, "you understand that anything you say here becomes part of the public record?" "I do, Your Honor." "And you're aware that your son's attorneys may not want you to speak?" "I am." "But with respect, Your Honor, this isn't about what my son's attorneys want. This isn't about what I want. This is about what's right." He paused, his jaw working. "And I've been silent about what's right for far too long." Judge Chen studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You may address the court." Marcus turned to face the gallery, the jury, the media cameras that were recording everything. Then, finally, he turned to his son. "Brandon." His voice cracked slightly on the name. "Stand up." Brandon rose shakily. His earlier arrogance completely evaporated. "I am here today," Marcus began, his voice strengthening, "not as a senator, not as a political figure, but as a father who has failed his son." A collective intake of breath swept through the courtroom. "I have failed you, Brandon, in the most fundamental way a parent can fail a child. I gave you everything except the one thing you actually needed: boundaries, consequences." The understanding that actions have repercussions and that no one is above the law. Tears began streaming down Brandon's face. Marcus continued, his words cutting deeper with each sentence. When you were caught cheating in high school, I made a donation to the school and it went away. When you crashed your first car drunk at 17, I called in favors and the charges disappeared. When you assaulted that college student at that fraternity party, I paid the family to drop the complaint. Gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. Several reporters frantically typed notes. Every time you faced consequences, I swooped in and saved you. I told myself I was protecting my son. But I wasn't protecting you. I was protecting myself from the embarrassment of having a son who couldn't behave. And in doing so, I created this. He gestured at Brandon, who was now openly sobbing. I created a young man who believes the rules don't apply to him, who thinks his last name is a shield, who would shove a 72-year-old war hero to the ground and feel no remorse. Marcus turned to Robert Hayes, who sat watching with Max pressed against his leg. Mr. Hayes, I owe you an apology that no words can adequately express. You served your country with honor. You've spent your life building up your community, teaching young people, including some from my own state, about responsibility and character. And my son repaid that lifetime of service by assaulting you and showing contempt for everything you represent. Robert nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. Marcus turned back to Judge Chen. Your Honor, I came here today to tell this court something that may shock everyone. My son's lawyers have been operating under the assumption that I would use my influence to protect him, that I would make phone calls, pull strings, ensure a favorable outcome. Westbrook looked like he might pass out. I'm here to tell you, publicly and on the record, that I will do no such thing. Marcus's voice rang with finality. In fact, I'm here to ask, to beg, this court to apply the full weight of the law to my son's case. No leniency. No special treatment. No consideration of his family's position. Brandon let out a choked sound that might have been, no. Furthermore, Marcus continued, I want it known that if anyone attempts to use my position or my office to influence this case, I will publicly condemn them and cooperate fully with any investigation into such corruption. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters rushed for the doors to file stories. Brandon collapsed back into his chair, his head in his hands. Westbrook and his legal team looked like their entire strategy had just imploded, which it had. Judge Chen struck her gavel repeatedly. Order! Order in this court! When silence finally returned, Marcus wasn't finished. I've spent 20 years in the Senate, he said quietly, fighting for law and order, for justice, for accountability. And all that time, I was a hypocrite. I demanded everyone else play by the rules while making sure my own son never had to face them. He finally looked directly at Brandon. Son, I love you. I will always love you. But loving you means letting you face the consequences of your actions. It means not protecting you from the pain that will teach you to be better. It means choosing what's right over what's comfortable. Marcus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but in the silent courtroom, every word was heard. I would rather visit you in prison as a father who finally taught you accountability than watch you walk free knowing I helped create a monster. Brandon was sobbing uncontrollably now, his shoulders shaking. Marcus turned back to Judge Chen. Your Honor, I have prepared a statement renouncing any political or familial interference in this case. I've CC'd the State Attorney General, the Ethics Committee, and every major media outlet. If my son receives any treatment different from what any other defendant would receive, better or worse, I will resign my Senate seat effective immediately. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, which he handed to the bailiff. This is my formal statement, signed and notarized. Judge Chen took the document, read it briefly, and then looked at Marcus Calloway with something that might have been respect. Senator Calloway, in 30 years on this bench, I have never seen a display quite like this. You understand that what you've just done may end your political career. Your Honor, if my political career means more to me than my son learning to be a decent human being, then it's a career not worth having. He turned to face the gallery one last time. To everyone who supported me, who voted for me, who believed in me, I'm sorry. I preached values I didn't practice in my own home. But I'm practicing them now. Marcus finally looked at his son one more time. The pain in his eyes was visceral. Brandon, I failed you as a father. But I won't fail you again. Whatever this court decides, know that I love you enough to let you face it. He turned and walked back toward his seat, but paused halfway. Without turning around, he added, and if this court sees fit to impose prison time, I hope my son uses it to become the man I should have raised him to be in the first place. The silence that followed was profound. Every person in that courtroom had just witnessed something extraordinary. A powerful man voluntarily dismantling his own influence, a father choosing justice over protection, a politician putting principle above politics. Brandon sat motionless, staring at his hands, his face a mask of shock and grief and perhaps, finally, the first glimmers of understanding. Judge Chen let the moment breathe before speaking. Mr. Calloway approached the bench. Brandon stood on shaking legs and approached. Mr. Calloway, Judge Chen said, her voice gentler now but still firm, your father just did something that took more courage than most people will ever display. He chose what was right over what was easy. He chose your future over your present comfort. Do you understand that? Brandon nodded, unable to speak. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly, not strategically. Can you do that? Another nod. Did you assault Robert Hayes? A long pause. Then, in a broken whisper, yes. Do you understand that what you did was wrong? Yes. Brandon's voice cracked. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Mr. Hayes, he turned toward Robert, tears streaming. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of what I did. You were right, and I was everything my father said. I'm so sorry. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't rehearsed. But it was, finally, genuine remorse. Judge Chen leaned back in her chair. This court will take a 30-minute recess before delivering its sentencing decision. Senator Calloway, you may remain if you wish, but you are not required to. I'll stay, Your Honor. My son needs to see that I'll be here for him, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard.